He wasn't supposed to survive. 50 lives ended that morning in Alaska, but one man walked out of the snow. This is not just a story about survival. It's a story about guilt, silence, and the haunting question, why him?
That's the question that haunts every headline, every rescue report, every sleepless night since that frigid morning in Alaska. But let's go back to where it began. It was just another winter day in one of the coldest, most remote corners of North America. Snow powdered the runways, frost coated the windows. But nothing unusual. Flights still took off. Life still moved on. A small regional aircraft carrying 51 people, a mix of locals, workers, students, parents, pilots, lifted into the pale blue sky. The passengers didn't know it yet, but for many of them, it would be the last sunrise they'd ever see. Inside the cabin, it was like any other flight. A little turbulence, a few quiet conversations. Some tried to nap. Others gazed out the window at the jagged Alaskan mountains, cloaked in endless white. No one expected anything to go wrong. After all, the weather was flyable. The route was familiar. The crew experienced. It was supposed to be just another safe trip across the snow-covered wilderness. But Alaska is not a place you underestimate. Somewhere above miles of uninhabited forest and frozen rivers, something went terribly wrong. Maybe it was mechanical failure. Maybe it was an unexpected wind shear. Maybe we'll never know. What we do know is this. The plane vanished from radar. One moment, a blip on the screen. The next, nothing. No mayday, no distress call. Just silence. And below, hundreds of square miles of wilderness, where no roads run, no towers rise, and survival is never guaranteed. Rescue teams scrambled. Helicopters launched. Search dogs deployed. But even in 2020's America, Alaska can still feel like another world, a place where the rules of nature are cruel and time is never on your side. Hours passed. Then a day, then two. Families waited by the phone. News stations aired emergency broadcasts. But the truth was sinking in. There was little hope. And when the wreckage was finally spotted, mangled metal buried under snowdrifts, fuselage shattered across a rocky ravine, the hope nearly vanished. No signs of life. No movement. Just a graveyard of twisted steel and frozen dreams until something stirred. Let's pause here because every great tragedy hides a sliver of the impossible. And in this story, that sliver was a 24-year-old forestry student, bruised, bleeding, half buried under broken seats and torn metal. He opened his eyes, alone, in silence, surrounded by death but still alive. And here's where the real story begins, not with the crash but with the question, why him? Why did this one young man survive when 50 others did not? Why did fate, chance, or something else choose him? Was it luck? Was it instinct? Was it something deeper? As we begin this journey together, I want you to think about this. In moments of crisis, when all odds are against you, what really keeps a human being alive? Is it the body or the mind? Because surviving a plane crash is only the beginning. The real test comes after. The moment of impact was violent, brutal, final. The aircraft slammed into a remote snowy ravine deep in the Alaskan wilderness. One moment, 51 people were flying above the clouds. The next, they were being torn through steel and ice at over 300 miles per hour. There was no soft landing, no miraculous glide, just devastation. The plane didn't just crash, it shattered, torn apart by the terrain. Fuselage split in half. Wings ripped from the body. Seats ejected, luggage exploded across the snow, and then silence. That kind of silence only happens after something irreversible. The kind of silence that rings in your ears because everything else is gone. No movement. No voices, just the wind and the cold. For days, search and rescue teams combed the region. But Alaska isn't like anywhere else. It hides things, swallows wreckage whole. Radar signals meant nothing out here. And so no one came. But in the middle of all that frozen wreckage, under twisted metal and broken glass, a single pair of eyes blinked open. His name was Daniel. Just 24 years old. A forestry student, someone who loved hiking, nature, the silence of the wild. But this wasn't the wilderness he knew. He was trapped, barely able to move, his limbs pinned between seat frames and snow. Blood had frozen to his coat. His ribs cracked. One lung was beginning to collapse. The cold was already sinking into his bones, and yet he was alive, not fully conscious. Not fully coherent, but alive. Can you imagine waking up in that moment? No one calling your name, no warm hand reaching for you. Just cold metal, broken bodies, and the horrifying realization that you're the only one breathing. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The shock had numbed everything. Physically, mentally, spiritually. But here's what makes survival so strange. You don't always choose to survive. Sometimes the body makes that decision before the mind has caught up. Instinct took over. He checked his limbs. One leg was twisted. His hand wouldn't close. There was a gash on his cheek he couldn't feel. But he found just enough strength to crawl out from under the wreckage. And there, lying in the snow, his breath fogging in the frozen air, he took in the full picture, a field of destruction. No signs of life. No signs of help, just him. I thought maybe it was a dream, he would later say. But dreams don't hurt this bad. And dreams don't smell like jet fuel and blood. The sun began to set, though in Alaska in winter it barely rose at all. Temperatures dipped to 15 degrees. His jacket was torn, his gloves gone. He was bleeding internally. And yet his brain told him one thing: stay awake. He began moving, not to escape but to stay alive, to create friction, to force his body to generate heat. He found a piece of the plane's insulation and wrapped it around himself. He found a half-buried carry-on bag inside, trail mix and a lighter. And with that lighter, Daniel started the first of many small fires that would keep him going. While the rest of the world thought he was already dead, he didn't know when help would come. He didn't even know if help would come. But he made a decision to fight for every second. That night, alone in the darkness, surrounded by the bodies of people he had sat beside just hours earlier, Daniel didn't pray for a miracle. He became the miracle. For most of us, the idea of surviving a plane crash is the peak of the nightmare. But for Daniel, it was just day one. Waking up alive was only the beginning. Now he was facing something far more terrifying than the crash itself: survival in complete isolation. No radio, no flares, no trail to follow, no way to know which direction led to help, and which led to nothing but more snow, more cliffs, more death. And time. Time was not on his side. The temperature had plummeted below 20 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Celsius. The kind of cold that bites through skin, numbs your mind, and drains your strength with every breath. Out here, even breathing feels like a decision. Night fell quickly, and with it came new dangers: wolves. Not in some exaggerated Hollywood way, but in the very real, very silent way wild predators move in the snow. He saw their tracks, heard distant howls, knew instinctively. He was no longer alone, but he wasn't part of the pack. He was the prey. Food? There was none. Not unless you count a half bag of airplane peanuts, spilled and frozen near the back of the wreckage. He scavenged what he could: peanuts, a crushed protein bar, a can of ginger ale. Water came from melting snow with a lighter he found in a burned carry-on. For heat? He pulled apart broken seats, stacking metal and insulation like a crude shelter. He tore foam from the backs of headrests. And at night he did the unthinkable. He burned seat cushions, releasing toxic fumes, yes, but also precious life-saving warmth. Every flame was a negotiation between staying warm and staying conscious. And all of this he did on a fractured foot. Imagine trying to survive in sub-zero temperatures with bones grinding against bone. Every step, a jolt of pain. But Daniel didn't give up. Using a strip of wiring from the cabin walls and a piece of cracked plastic, he made a makeshift splint. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe. But it was something. And in moments like these, something is what keeps you alive. But the real enemy? It wasn't just the cold, or the pain, or the hunger. It was the silence. The kind of silence that asks questions you're not ready to answer. Why me? Why am I here? Why did I wake up when they didn't? He remembered the mother and her young son who had smiled at him before takeoff. They were seated just a few feet away, now gone. He couldn't stop thinking about them. Couldn't stop replaying their faces. That kind of survivor's guilt, it doesn't whisper. It screams. Was there something I could have done? Did I deserve this second chance? And that's the thing about surviving. You don't just battle the elements. You battle yourself. Every day bled into the next. There was no sunrise, no clear time. Just cold and pain, and the growing fear that no one was coming. Still, Daniel fought. He reinforced his shelter, tracked the stars, kept his fires low to conserve fuel. He rationed every bite. Every drop of melted snow. He wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to live 1 minute at a time. And that choice, it became his weapon. Because out here in the frozen heart of Alaska, hope is more than a feeling. It's fuel. It's fire. And Daniel, alone, injured, half-starved, refused to let it burn out. Surviving in the wilderness is never just about the cold or the hunger or the wounds. The real battle happens inside your mind. And for Daniel, 6 days alone in the Alaskan snow, injured, starving, freezing, that mental battle became more dangerous than the wolves, more brutal than the broken bones. He started seeing things, not the kind of flash you'd expect in a horror movie, but slow, creeping hallucinations that felt real. He began talking out loud, to himself, to the wind, to his brother, who had died in the crash. At first it was like memory, just a voice echoing through the silence. But then it became something else, a conversation. He told his brother everything, that he was sorry, that he didn't understand why he was the one who lived, that he didn't want to go on. Not like this, not alone, why not us both? He whispered. Why am I still here? No one answers those questions in the wild. But Daniel kept asking them anyway, because that's what isolation does to you. It strips away the noise of the world and leaves you alone with your guilt, your grief, and your questions. On the 4th day, he reached a breaking point. He looked out across the frozen valley, no roads, no lights, no movement, and thought, this is it. No one's coming. And in that moment, he almost gave up. With his foot still fractured, ribs aching and breath shallow, Daniel started crawling toward the mountain ridge. He didn't have a plan, no compass, no idea what was on the other side, but deep down he knew, if I stay here, I die waiting. So he crawled. Inch by inch, over sharp ice and jagged snowdrifts. Every movement lit up his nerves with pain. But something inside him refused to quit. Not just the instinct to live, but the need for this suffering to mean something. He wasn't fighting for comfort. He was fighting for closure. He couldn't explain it. But somewhere between life and death, something in him said, your story doesn't end here. And then, on day 6th, he heard it, a distant thrum. A vibration in the sky. At first he thought it was another hallucination, another cruel trick of the mind. But then the sound grew louder, closer. He looked up, blinded by the white sky, and saw it, an armored helicopter. The sun reflected off a twisted piece of wreckage he had stacked earlier, like a flare, and that tiny glint caught the eye of a rescuer flying hundreds of feet above. Within minutes the team descended. They didn't find a body. They found a man still breathing, frozen, weak, barely conscious. But alive, Daniel was flown to the nearest hospital. He was treated for frostbite, malnutrition, multiple fractures, and exposure. But the physical recovery? That was the easy part. The real healing took much longer. Because when your body survives a crash, but your soul is left behind in that snow-covered graveyard, you don't just walk away, you carry the weight of every voice that went silent. You carry the dreams that died beside you. You carry the question that never leaves, why me? But here's what's extraordinary. Daniel didn't bury that question. He lived with it, spoke about it, let it become part of his story, not as a burden, but as a reminder that sometimes survival isn't about being the strongest, or smartest, or most prepared. It's about choosing to hold on, even when every part of you is screaming to let go. After 6 days alone in the frozen wilderness, Daniel was finally found, a glint of twisted metal, a speck of movement. A miracle, some would say. The helicopter lowered into the ravine like a lifeline from the heavens. Paramedics rushed through the snow, bracing for the worst. But what they found wasn't a body, it was a man, half frozen, barely conscious, but somehow still breathing. Daniel was airlifted out of the mountains and rushed to the nearest hospital. He had frostbite on both feet. His lips were cracked, skin burned from cold exposure. His body was starved, dehydrated, and bruised to the bone, and yet the doctors said he would make a full physical recovery. They were amazed. He'd survived what should have killed him a dozen times over. But survival isn't just measured in broken bones and pulse readings. The real pain, The kind no scan can detect? That's what came next, because when Daniel finally lay down in a warm bed, wrapped in sterile blankets, breathing clean air, and hearing human voices again, he didn't feel joy, he felt something else entirely. Guilt, emptiness, silence. He didn't ask, "Why me?" anymore. That question had no answer. Instead, he whispered, "Why not them?" The mother with the kind eyes, the boy who offered him gum before takeoff, the pilot who smiled confidently when the cabin doors closed. They were all gone, and he was still. Here, that reality doesn't hit like a crash. It sinks in slowly, quietly, like snow filling the gaps in your soul. You see, Daniel didn't come back a hero. He came back a haunted man. At night, even months later, he would wake up drenched in sweat, hearing phantom screams. He'd close his eyes and feel the cold again, the silence, the stillness of death. Sometimes he swore he could still hear his brother's voice, the same brother who had died in the crash beside him. People around him said, "You're so lucky." But he didn't feel lucky. They said, "You're strong." But inside, he felt fragile, because survival isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a burden. The world sees the rescue, the moment the helicopter lifts off, the miracle headline. But they don't see what happens after the cameras are gone. They don't see the sleepless nights, the therapy sessions, the survivor's guilt that lingers like a shadow you can't shake. Daniel never gave public speeches. He didn't write a book or launch a foundation. He didn't want attention, he just wanted peace. But over time, through quiet walks, long talks, and years of inner work, he began to realize something, that survival doesn't need to be celebrated. It needs to be understood. It needs to be honored, not with parties or medals, but with meaning. So Daniel made a promise to himself not to forget, not to erase the pain, but to carry it forward with purpose, to live deliberately, to love deeper, to be present for every small moment he almost didn't get to have. Because when you've come face to face with death, life is no longer something you take for granted. It becomes something sacred, fragile, urgent. So no, Daniel didn't celebrate surviving, but he did redefine what it means to be alive, not just to exist, but to feel, to heal, to keep going even when the weight is heavy, even when the memory hurts. Because sometimes the greatest courage is not in surviving the crash, but in learning how to live afterward. For 6 days, Daniel fought nature, the cold, the hunger, the silence, but for the rest of his life, he fought something far more powerful. The question, why did he survive when so many others didn't? We often think survival is the end of the story, that once you're rescued, once you're safe, you've made it. But here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes surviving is just the beginning, because survivors don't just walk away with scars. They carry something deeper. They carry the weight of what they saw, and the voices they'll never hear again. Daniel left that mountain alive, but he didn't leave it whole. In the weeks after his rescue, people praised his strength. They called him a miracle. They asked him what it felt like to beat death. But what do you say to that, when all you can think about is the empty seats beside you? Why me? What made me different? Did I do enough? Those aren't questions you can shake off. They live in the background of every conversation, every quiet moment, every time you try to smile and pretend you're okay. Survival, for many, comes with a guilt that runs deeper than any wound. And here's where the story widens, because Daniel's questions are not just his. They're the questions that every survivor eventually faces. The cancer patient in remission, the soldier who came home, the driver who walked away from a crash that took others. Different stories. Same ache. What kind of strength does it take to live when everyone else didn't? And maybe that's the lesson. That real survival isn't about running faster or being stronger. It's about learning how to carry pain and purpose in the same breath. It's about waking up and choosing to live with the memories, not to erase them, but to honor them. Daniel never became a motivational speaker. He never stood on a stage and told people how to survive. But maybe that's what makes his story matter more, because he lived quietly, intentionally, and with the kind of reverence that only someone who's touched death can understand. He knew something most of us don't, that life is fragile, that time is precious, that silence isn't always empty. It's often full of names you'll never say again. So, what does it mean to survive? It means breathing when it hurts. It means remembering when it would be easier to forget. It means telling the story, not because it's easy, but because someone else needs to hear it. It means carrying the voices of those who didn't make it, and letting them shape the way you live the rest of your days, because the wild didn't take Daniel. But it changed him. And in that change was something sacred. If you've ever survived something, loss, trauma, heartbreak, then you already know. The hardest part isn't making it out alive. It's figuring out what to do with that life. Daniel's story doesn't end on that mountain. It begins there.
If this story moved you, subscribe for more haunting, true survival stories. The next mystery awaits.